Hey guys, welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show. We're just waiting for some more lineups to come in. Got a few already, but not all the teams yet, especially that Astros one. We'll get to offense though. Got my RotoPros t-shirt. So I'll try to keep that in the camera frame as much as possible. Starting with pitching, I guess that's where we always start. So clarifying some stuff from the podcast last night, and I think it's a lot of the same things, but there is some line movement that actually supports the pitchers that we already liked. So this is always good news. Sometimes doesn't matter too much, but it's never a bad thing when the line movement supports the pitchers that we're already looking at. So here's what's changed as far as the betting lines. Chris Archer and the Rays opened at -110. They're actually up to -125 now. And that's against the public. 59% of public bets are on the Twins. So the public is against Archer. Sharp money is on Archer, and the line is moving towards him. The over-under for this game is relatively low. It opened at 7.5. It's kind of trending towards 8. But I think there's only one reason for that, and that's because Brad Miller is back in the lineup for the Rays. Brad Miller's not some great hitter or anything, but the Rays are so bad at offense that even a mediocre player like Miller coming back into the batting order is a huge upgrade over the guys who were playing instead of him. So that's why I think the over-under is going up a bit. The public is betting the over pretty heavily here. But I like Chris Archer a lot. He's still by far my favorite pitching option on the slate. His price is $8,800. And I honestly think he could have a comparable expected output to guys like Verlander, Kershaw, and Scherzer. Archer and Verlander are probably similar quality pitchers. Archer's a little more boom or bust, more walks, more strikeouts, gets hit a little bit harder, but he is just great at home, and he's home for this game. Verlander's on the road. Matchup is a little worse for Archer. I think we've been too pessimistic on the White Sox offense. They do have some good hitters. I think Yohan Moncada is already a really good player. Matt Davidson kind of breaking out a bit, should be better than we thought he would be. Jose Abreu is really good. The Twins offense is okay. I mean, Sano and Dozier, good hitters. Logan Morrison against righties. There's a little bit of reason to be afraid of the Twins lineup, but the fact that it's a home game and it's a pitcher's park in Tampa, I think even if they were the same price, I'd have a tough time deciding between Archer and Verlander. So with Archer being a lot cheaper than all the high-end guys, he is by far my favorite pitching option on the slate. As far as percent of lineups that I'll make that include him, it's going to be pretty close to all in. I don't want him in 20 out of 20, and this does seem like a standard 20 lineups kind of night with so many teams to choose from. There's 15 games on this slate. I mean, you could make more than 20 lineups. I think that's reasonable. Just you end up sometimes over-diversifying when you make too many different combinations. But in 20 lineups, let's say maybe 17, 18 Archer lineups, I think that's where I'm looking. That's kind of what I feel like the direction will be. So beyond that, like there are a lot of good options, but Archer is the clear-cut best choice because he's just severely underpriced, and the start for him this season has been pretty unlucky. There's nothing about him that suggests he's gotten worse except for his ERA. A lot of balls put in play have just found holes, and generally it's just not going to happen. I mean, it does hurt that Kevin Kiermaier's on the DL, but the Rays should still be okay defensively. Malik Smith is fast in the outfield, nowhere close to Kiermaier, but Archer gets enough strikeouts anyway that even if he does get a little unlucky on balls in play, the strikeout upside against the Twins at home, I mean, he's the easiest value play of the night. So after Archer, it's a tough call between Verlander and Kershaw as the high-end guy, and I think it is doable to make a lot of lineups with Archer and with one expensive pitcher. We still don't know if Anthony Rendon is playing for the Nationals. I'm going to assume that he's not because he just hasn't been playing. So if Rendon's out of the lineup, the Nationals offense is kind of just mediocre after the top of the order. So we have Trey Turner, Howie Kendrick, and then presumably Bryce Harper and Ryan Zimmerman. There's no one really who can hit after that. They don't have a single good hitter. I mean, it would be Rendon. He's a very good offensive player. So it dramatically changes the matchup for Kershaw. If we don't know the status of Rendon prior to lock, then I think I would probably just split Kershaw and Verlander down the middle at this point. Maybe even a slight lean towards Verlander because the Astros offense is an offense to use a lot of, and there's correlation with the win bonus for Verlander. So maybe slight lean to Verlander if we don't know if Rendon's playing, more Verlander if we know that Rendon's out. But if Anthony Rendon is, or if we know that Rendon's in, more Verlander. But if we know that Rendon is out, then it's a big boost for Kershaw. And Kershaw might even be a better play anyway. He's just the best pitcher in baseball year after year. He still is. Nothing's really changed that. Even the slight velocity dip, he's still pitched great this year. So I think Kershaw could become my second highest owned pitcher after Chris Archer. But we'll have to see if we get an Anthony Rendon update. That is going to have a pretty significant impact where maybe I'm 60-40 in favor of Verlander, and it flips to 60-40 or even 70-30 in favor of Kershaw if Rendon's out. So hopefully we know. The other really interesting pitcher, and it's nothing's changed from last night for the people that listen to the podcast, Sonny Gray at home against the Blue Jays. So the Blue Jays just scored a ton of runs over the beginning of the week. They were facing the Royals, and they were at home. The Royals pitching is bad, and their bullpen is as bad as any team in the league. And the Blue Jays scored a ton of runs just against terrible pitching. This is not a good offense overall, especially without Josh Donaldson. I think they would be a decent offense with Josh Donaldson, but he's on the DL. So we do have their lineup. Curtis Granderson, sort of decent hitter against righties. I think Teoscar Hernandez is actually a good player, but not good enough where I'm not going to use a pitcher because he's batting second. And then Smoke, Solarte, Martin. I mean, I don't know. There's some talent there, but it's not some scary middle of the order. And then I think it's just kind of average hitters at the bottom of the order too. Morales, Pilar, Ledmus Diaz, and I think Lourdes Gurriel. That's Yuli Gurriel's younger brother. The Astros Gurriel, that's his brother, is batting ninth. I'm pretty sure this is his first career game, but Yulieski is the better player. Even if it was Yulieski Gurriel, just the same person batting ninth for the Blue Jays, that wouldn't change too much for me. So Sonny Gray is really cheap compared to where he usually is. His ERA is kind of just through the roof this year, close to 7, just pulling that up. Yeah, 6.92 ERA for Sonny Gray. His FIP is 267. His xFIP is 385. And those numbers are actually a little bit better even than what he had last year. Gray's strikeouts are up. His walks are up. There are tangible changes here in Gray's pitching profile that I guess we didn't cover too much last night. So he's throwing slightly harder. His four-seamer, about the same as last year, but he's throwing it way less often. So last year, Sonny Gray threw his four-seamer, just trying to find the information here again. He threw his four-seamer 55, 60% of the time. That's kind of where he sat for his whole career. This year, he's throwing his four-seamer only a third of the time. He's also throwing his slider less, and he's throwing a cutter more. He's throwing his curveball 32% of the time. So he's throwing his curveball as much as his fastball. The career curveball percentage for Sonny Gray is 19%. So I think this is a theme for Yankees pitchers. The Yankees organization, for whatever reason, is promoting throwing less fastballs. The Yankees have the hardest average fastball velocity in the league. They also throw the fewest fastballs in the league. I trust that their analytics are doing it for a reason. Their front office, their analytics department, they must have a method to this. But it generally does make sense, and I think the Red Sox have gone in this direction too. More off-speed pitches means more swings and misses, harder to generate whiffs on fastballs. So maybe Gray has a little less control, throwing more off-speed pitches, but he should strike more guys out too. And for DFS, this makes him a much more appealing pitcher. So the increased strikeout rate, I think, is real. I think he will walk more guys this year too if he's throwing more breaking balls. But the ERA is just not going to hold at 7. His batting average on balls in play is over 400, and he's only been able to strand 61% of base runners. League average there is in the 70s. So basically what that means is Gray is not getting out of jams. And I think almost all of that can be attributed to luck, especially because Gray has been just league average 71.8% for his career strand rate. That's just right in line with what basically every pitcher is. Like Kershaw is one of the best pitchers ever. He's in the high 60s. The worst guys ever around 80. No one really deviates from low 70s% on left on base percentage. So 61.5 is just unlucky. It means that he's just not getting the outs when there are runners on base. And when that stuff starts normalizing, when the balls in play start finding more fielders, Sonny Gray is going to be fine. So I don't have a problem with him at all as a pitcher. I think he is probably above average, not great, but he's generating a lot of swing and misses. He's going to get strikeouts this year, and his price is 7,700. He's at home against a below average offense. So Gray is not going to have a lot of ownership. I think because of the bad start, people are not going to be using him. And I think it's a 15-game slate, so ownership doesn't really matter too much, but I could see Sonny Gray in single-digit ownership tonight, and he does have a ton of upside. Sonny Gray's good games are as good as anyone. He seemingly strikes out everyone some nights. So, 10.4 Ks per nine for the year. The upside is apparent for sure. He's a little riskier than Archer. He's a lot riskier than, obviously Kershaw, Verlander, even Scherzer. But there's no one in that price range where Sonny Gray is. Like, there is no safe choice here. I guess it's Archer, but beyond that, Drew Pomeranz is a similar type of pitcher to Sonny Gray. I think his matchup is a little more challenging. It's also his first start of the year. But I guess you can make a case for Pomeranz over Gray. I do think Pomeranz will have more ownership than Gray. But I think Gray is probably just a little bit better of a pitcher, and I think he is a little bit better of a matchup. And he does have home field advantage. Pomeranz doesn't. So I would go Gray over Pomeranz. I think Sean Newcomb is in the same category as those guys. But again, all of these are boom-bust picks. I would maybe roster some Pomeranz. Probably prefer Newcomb to Pomeranz. But I have Gray way ahead of those guys. And then there really aren't any cheap guys I have any interest in. So pitching exposure for me in order, it's going to be Archer, far and away number one. Kershaw, Verlander, and Sonny Gray kind of mixed in. Not sure exactly what the exposure will be, but that's kind of the group for number two. And then I think you can probably put Sean Newcomb in a lineup or two. I think you could maybe put Drew Pomeranz in a lineup. Those would be the number 5 and 6 choices. So I think that's it for pitching. There's no one. All these cheap pitchers are bad. I'll say this before I get to offense, though. On 15-game slates, normally there's so many good spots that it's kind of hard to narrow it down. But we have a lot of aces pitching tonight. So this 15-game slate, I think, is a little less challenging than normal. Like Scherzer's pitching, Kershaw, Verlander, Syndergaard, Bauer, Archer, Bundy, Gray, Samardzija, Pomeranz. Like, there are a lot of good pitchers going. A few aces, some good number 2s, number 3s. So there really aren't that many offenses in really good spots. I think it's actually reasonably easy to have a narrow focus even on such a large slate. I didn't mention Scherzer. I think it's a tougher matchup for Scherzer than it is for Kershaw and Verlander. So Verlander's facing the White Sox. Even though it's on the road, it's still the White Sox. Kershaw is just probably a little better than Scherzer. He has home field advantage. Scherzer doesn't. It's going to be hard for Scherzer to get the win bonus because he's going up directly against Kershaw. He's also more expensive than Kershaw. He's more expensive than Verlander. And I think the Dodgers' offense is better than the Nationals' offense, unless Rendon is playing. So if Rendon's playing, the only reasons that I would favor Kershaw over Scherzer is small price difference, but still a difference. Home field advantage, and then just more likely for Kershaw to get the win. So, Scherzer just doesn't make the cut for me. Moving to offense, though. So, do we have an Astros lineup? Just refresh one more time. I'll talk about some other teams first, and then we'll come back to them. Still no Astros lineup. All right. Well, I guess I'll start with them anyway, because we probably know roughly who's going to be playing: Springer, Altuve, Correa, Reddick, maybe Bregman. Is Bregman hurt? I have to double check that. But whoever it is for the Astros, it's a really good spot for them. It's James Shields pitching, and James Shields also actually appeared out of the bullpen I think it was 2 days ago. So the A's and White Sox played an extra inning game on Wednesday. and Shields had to actually come in. It was like the 15th inning or something, and he got the loss in the game. So I guess it's sort of short rest. He hadn't pitched in a week prior to that. But no matter what the situation is for James Shields, he's really bad. So Shields was the worst pitcher that I think anyone has ever seen the first half of last season. FIP and XFIP in the high sixes, giving up a ton of home runs. And then in the second half, he started throwing a little more sidearm some of the time. He became a little more deceptive, and he got a little better. He was still awful, but like he probably moved himself ahead of guys like Chris Tillman and Derek Holland and some of like the other really bad pitchers in the league. Like at this point, I would call Shields bottom 5 starting pitcher, but I don't think he's the worst. So I'm a little wary of going too heavy on the Astros because Shields, I think, might be just marginally better than people realize, but he definitely is still awful. So the Astros are going to be my highest owned offense. I don't know. If it were first half Shields from last year, I would maybe just stack them in 20 out of 20 lineups. With Shields being slightly improved, maybe 15 out of 20 lineups, it's still the best spot. I'm a little more cautious. But this might just be nitpicking anyway. It's a really good offense. They're not that expensive. Shields is terrible. The rest of the White Sox pitching is terrible. Like their relievers are as bad as any team in baseball. The Astros are guaranteed 9 at-bats being the away team, so that probably more than mitigates not having home field advantage for them. The prices on Springer, Correa, and Altuve are reasonable, especially Altuve at 4,900. Like there are times where these guys are priced in the mid 5,000s in good matchups, and I guess because they didn't hit that well in Seattle, the prices just aren't very high. So I like the Astros a lot, and even the cheap guys at the bottom of the order, I guess we don't know who they are yet, but Marwin Gonzalez 3,300, Brian McCann 3,600, Evan Gattis 3,500, Derek Fisher 3,000. Josh Reddick's still only 4,100. Shields is bad against everybody, but he's even worse against lefties. So I think anyone batting from the left side of the plate for the Astros tonight is worth heavily targeting. There's generally some risk that Fisher gets pinch hit for righty, sometimes Gattis, sometimes Marisnik, whoever's available on the bench. I guess if Bregman doesn't start, it could be Bregman or Gurriel, whichever guy's on the bench. Sometimes Marwin Gonzalez. But if the Astros are up enough runs, they're not going to be pinch hitting for anybody. And this game probably is as likely to be a blowout as, well, probably the most likely to be a blowout since the Bartolo-Colon game in Houston. But as far as the Vegas line, I mean, the Astros are minus 260. So, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that they win by several runs. And, yeah, maybe we don't have to worry about pinch hitters in that situation. So, however it plays out, I mean, this team is too cheap for such a good matchup. I think maybe they weren't priced up because we didn't know who the White Sox starter was going to be before the slates opened, because the White Sox just announced that Shields was starting a couple hours ago. So I have Astros number 1. I think I've talked about them as much as I can without actually knowing what the lineup is. So other offenses, for their prices, I actually think my favorite offense would be the Texas Rangers. I think we don't need too much in terms of salary savings because there is some pretty cheap pitching value in Archer and also Sonny Gray, but mostly Archer. So if we did have to worry about a salary crunch, the Rangers at home against Felix Hernandez would be my favorite team. So there is wind blowing in Texas, but that hasn't really impacted the betting line. And this is a situation where I think the betting line tells us a lot because it's very subjective. Like, it's a hitter's park. Felix Hernandez is bad, but there's wind blowing in. How do we weigh and balance all of these factors? This is what the betting line is telling us, and it kind of just aggregates what sharp bettors feel about like the combination of these variables. So most people are betting the under, but the total has actually gone up from 9 to 9.5. So despite the fact that people are betting the under because of the wind, the pitching is bad enough that I think sharper bettors are realizing there should be a lot of runs anyway. So the way I look at this game is it's a downgrade for home run hitters, but the guys who get their points from getting on base, hitting line drives, singles, doubles, stolen bases, that sort of thing, it's a great spot for them. They're not going to be as negatively affected by the conditions of the wind blowing in. But I'm not off the home run hitters. I lean more towards guys like Jerks and Profar really cheap, batting second. Maybe I'll have a little bit less Joey Gallo than I otherwise would. I just got to find this lineup again. Nomar Mazara, Adrian Beltre are cheap enough that I don't really care about the situation for them. And then I think you can mix in guys at the bottom of the order just because it's a really good matchup against Felix, Guzman, Chirinos, Drew Robinson, Keener, Falefa. I think that's how you say his name. Not sure. But Felix Hernandez, 6.3 Ks per nine this year, 3.4 walks per nine. He's throwing, I think, slower. Let me double check that. Yeah, his fastball velocity is down to 89, and 89 to 90. This is the lowest he's ever been. Peak Felix was throwing 95, 96. Even 2 years ago, Felix was throwing 91 to 93. Now he's down to around 90, and he's given up a lot of homers to start the year. He gave up a lot of homers last year. He's not getting the strikeouts. He's walking more batters, probably having to nibble on the corners more because he just doesn't have the stuff to strike people out. 7.8% swinging strikes, and his career low before this was 9%. So he's way down. I think Felix is just about done at 32 years old. I mean, it's sad, but I think Felix is pretty awful now. So good spot for Texas, and the line movement also supports the Rangers side of the game more than the Mariners side of the game. They've moved from -110 to -120 with the public heavily on Seattle. So I like Texas potentially the most. They're going to be my favorite source of plugs with Astro stacks. I think it's worth making a few Ranger stacks also. The Mariners are in a good spot too on the opposite side of this game. My concern is that Mike Minor's biggest weakness is allowing fly balls, and if the wind is going to hold up some fly balls, it limits the upside for Seattle. But they're cheap enough that I think they're worth rostering anyway, like 4,300 for Nelson Cruz against an average to below average left-handed pitcher. That's too cheap for him. Haniger's 3,500, Segura's 3,400. I don't have too much interest in Seattle lefties unless you're making the full stack. Maybe I'll do one of those in 20 lineups, but Cruz, Haniger, good plug. Segura's a good plug. Full stacking the Rangers side, though, is the preferred pick for me in this game. So Astros, Rangers, that's the number 1 and 2. And then it's really just plugs after that. Like I don't plan on really stacking another offense. There are some in good spots, but it seems like the Astros and the Rangers are just by far the best values for their prices. But there are plenty of plugs that are worth using, and there's some strange platoon splits for some of these pitchers that would make some of the lefties or righties good hitters, but not the other side. So I'll get to some of that now. I'm just going to refresh one more time, see if we have this Astro starting lineup yet. So hang on. Nope. Still no. All right. But I like everyone from the Astros. We've gotten most of the other starting lineups. So Brad Miller's back for the Rays. He's probably my favorite second baseman outside of Altuve. 3,200, batting fourth. Lance Lynn, right-handed pitcher who is significantly worse against lefties. So where you can afford him, where he kind of fits in, Brad Miller, I think is a good target at second base. Jerks and Profar is good at second base too at 2,700, but he's also eligible at shortstop. I'll probably have more Profar than Miller, but I like both of those guys as plugs a lot. So that's kind of just it for middle infield. I mean, Correa, definitely going to have a lot of Correa stacking the Astros this much. And then Gene Segura too. So yeah, I guess I'll go position by position. That's my middle infield options. Is there anyone else? I guess it seems strange to start with second base and shortstop, but that's just where I happen to start. So, oh well. Derek Dietrich, is he? Okay, Dietrich had infield eligibility before, but he doesn't. He's in the outfield now. So Dietrich is, I'll start with outfield. One of my favorite outfield plugs. Julius Chastain, substantially worse against lefties, like Lance Lynn. Both of those guys have huge splits. So I like Marlins lefties a lot. Dietrich in the outfield, definitely. And then other outfielders, let's see. Not great hitting conditions in Baltimore. Prices are pretty low there. Brantley, 3,700. Alvarez, 3,000. But good pitching matchup. I don't really have any interest in that game. Adam Frazier leading off. And he does have second base eligibility too. I think Adam Frazier leading off against Ben Lively for the Pirates, That's really my only target from that game. It's a bad pitching matchup, but the wind is blowing in. It's cold. It's not really a great hitting environment. So I like the cheap guys. I like Frazier. He can steal bases. He's leading off. It's a good spot for him. That's probably the only player I'll roster from that game. More lefties against Lance Lynn, Denard Span leading off. I think him and Miller are the primary targets to go for from Tampa. Malik Smith batting way down in the order. I guess you can maybe use him, but I'd rather use Span for cheaper in the leadoff spot and Miller at second base. Let's see what else. All right. Royals-Tigers, second half of a doubleheader. So we have the Royals lineup, no Tigers lineup yet. The Royals are playing all their regulars again. Tigers don't really have any good hitters outside of Cabrera, Castellanos, and Victor Martinez. So probably no interest there. No one's that cheap. Jake Junis, I think, is okay. Daniel Norris, probably not very good. But Royals righties, if they were cheaper, maybe. Whit Merrifield's 4,000. Yeah, no real interest in the Royals. Fading the Mets-Braves game. Pretty good pitching matchup. I mean, the Mets have upside against Newcomb. He's very boom or bust, but very expensive Mets offense. So no interest there. And I think that might be it for outfield plugs. It's a pretty narrow focus for me tonight. So Dietrich, again, just getting to the Marlins again. Brewers are pretty expensive. The Cardinals have some guys that I think are relatively cheap. Marcelo Zuna, I think, is worth considering at 4,300. And then I guess I'll go to first base now because it really doesn't seem like we have any outfielders to talk about. Jose Martinez for the Cardinals against Brandon Finnegan. Nice lefty-righty matchup. Jose Martinez, 3,700 at first base. Here's another outfielder. We've got Albert Almora leading off for the Cubs, 3,200. I think that's one of the stronger plugs tonight. And then my favorite outfield plug, we don't have the lineup for this team yet, but Andrew Heaney has pretty strong splits, and he's a lot worse against righties. The Giants do have some righties, and Andrew McCutchen's only 3,400. The Angels lowered their fences this year. I mean, if anyone watched the Red Sox series against them, there were a lot more homers than usual, especially from Boston's side. But I think McCutchen could do really well here. Posey is first base and catcher eligible. I think Posey is worth using at catcher, and Austin Jackson, 2,700. If he's leading off, I like Austin Jackson. But the primary target from the late games with the lineups not coming out yet, Andrew McCutchen is way too cheap against Andrew Heaney. So I like McCutchen a lot as a plug. Kind of hard to rank how to prioritize them. But McCutchen, Dietrich, Almora, all good plugs. First base, I mentioned Jose Martinez. My favorite first base plug, and I'll probably have a ton of him, is Justin Bour. He's only 3,000. He's a really good power hitter. Like I mentioned, Chassin, terrible against left-handed batters, and it's basically a perfect spot for Bour in a hitter's park in Milwaukee. So I like Bour a lot at first base. I'm going to be using some Marwin Gonzalez and Gurriel there because they may both be starting for the Astros. They're both first base eligible. Jose Martinez, good play. Joey Gallo at first base, worth using also. And then, so we've got third base and catcher to cover. There are a lot of games tonight. So everyone from the Astros, again, worth using. Longoria, 3,100. Again, Heaney not very good against righties. But I think Travis Shaw at third base, 3,800. Against Trevor Richards, I think he's a good play. What else do we have here? Adrian Beltre for Astros stacks. You need a third base plug. But third base isn't going to be a tough position tonight because Gurriel is eligible at third. Bregman's eligible at third. At least one of those guys should be starting. So most of my third base exposure will be occupied by Astros players. But I do think Shaw is the best guy to mix in after that. And that's probably it at third. Catcher, Posey. I think I'm going to be heavily targeting Posey. And then Brian McCann, too, for Astros stacks. Robinson Chirinos from Texas. And I think that probably does it. We don't have lineups from some of these late games yet, but I don't really think there's too much to look at. The one offense I'll mention because it's a notable fade, I guess, is the Red Sox against Kendall Graveman. Graveman's really bad, and the wind is blowing out a little bit in Oakland, but it's still a pitcher's park. My issue with the Red Sox is just their pricing. Mookie Betts is 5,700, Benintendi's 4,400, Hanley 47, JD Martinez 52. I think Devers is fine. I just prefer Travis Shaw. And the ownership, I mean, I know ownership doesn't matter too much on 15 games because it gets diluted when there's this many games. But the Red Sox should be the chalkiest offense. They've just been so good lately, and I think it's worth fading them for the leverage. But really, it's just a matter of pricing. Like, you can fit them if you use cheap pitching, but then you're kind of using cheaper plugs than you otherwise would. I just think the expected output is higher for Houston. James Shields is probably at least as bad as Kendall Graveman, and the hitting environments are similar, and the Astros are cheaper. So I prefer Houston to Boston, and that's why I won't really have any Boston. But I think you can make the case for Devers. I think you can also rationalize fading him because I think Devers was the highest owned player on last night's slate. I think he could be the highest owned player again on tonight's slate because he's quote unquote on a hot streak. Yeah, I don't know. Do with that what you want. And one more game that I think is interesting where we don't have lineups yet. Diamondbacks, Padres, and then I'll wrap this up because it's been a pretty long one. The Padres get a really good matchup against Matt Koch. I think that's how you say his name. He's been awful in the minors, and he's been awful in his brief major league stints. My concern for stacking against him is that this might just turn into a bullpen game. Like maybe Jorge De La Rosa just ends up pitching a lot because Koch has been a reliever. He's been a starter. He probably is going to have a very short leash tonight. So people probably are going to be, I think, a little overexcited to stack against him. The line movement here is really significant, though. The Padres were plus 135, and now they're only plus 105. And that's with almost everyone betting on Arizona. So I do think the Padres should score, but I think we might end up with some pinch hitters because we end up with lefty relievers in the game, that sort of thing. So I'm not too high on the Padres offense, but I would be if they were cheaper. I guess my bigger concern is their pricing. It's just not a very good offense. And Perella was around 3,000 last week. He's 3,900. Franchi Cordero, 35. Hosmer, 4,000. Christian Villanueva is 3,600. I think I'd pay that if it were a lefty pitcher, but it's not. This just isn't a very good offense overall. So the pricing, like Texas, is cheaper. I much prefer the Rangers. I think Felix Hernandez is as bad as anyone. Probably a little bit better of a hitting environment in Arizona. But I think it's pretty easy to overlook the Padres tonight because the pricing is just a little too high and the matchup looks more appealing maybe than it is because Arizona just might go with more of a reliever-based game. And then the Diamondbacks side, Alex Avila is another catcher to target at 2,800 if he's starting. I don't really buy Tyson Ross being good yet. His velocity is still down. But the rest of the Diamondbacks are pretty pricey against him. So I think Daniel Descalso, if he's batting fifth again, he's been priced in the mid-2000s. He's 2,500 tonight. I like Descalso and Avila, but that's probably it from Arizona. And then the last game to touch on just very quickly is the Coors game. We do have weather concerns there, and that's my biggest reason for fading it. So the Albert Almora plug is contingent on the game actually happening, obviously. The rest of the Cubs are really expensive. Like, I just think it's way too much to pay for any of them, especially Javier Baez at 4,800. If there's another Cubs player to use, maybe it's Addison Russell at 3,900, but I think there are just better shortstops to use. I'd rather just pay up for Correa. So Almora is really my only target from the Cubs, and it's easier to fade if the game potentially gets rained out anyway. From the Rockies, again, really expensive. I think Carlos Gonzalez is not necessarily in the lineup yet. Give this page one more refresh to see if we actually have an update. And then I will let you guys go. Rockies lineup. Nope, no Rockies lineup. Okay, so Cargo's 4,200. I like him if he's playing. And if Gerardo Parra is playing, then he's the best value on the Rockies side at 3,200. It's going to be a boost for Parra if Gonzalez is out because he'll probably about higher in the order. So the only guys I really am too interested in from Coors are Almora and maybe Parra. Everyone else is just really expensive. The pitching matchup isn't awful. we're seeing a lot of line movement to the under because it's going to be cold and rainy, bad hitting conditions. I mean, relatively speaking, it's still a Coors Field. The total's still 10 runs. But this isn't a summer Coors game. The ball's not going to be flying out of there like it usually does. So it's a little bit of a scary fade, but especially with the weather concerns, I think it's justifiable. So to wrap it up, Archer, number 1. He's the guy tonight. He'll be my highest owned player. And then some mix of Verlander, Kershaw, Sonny Gray, possibly Sean Newcomb. I think that's where I'm going to draw the line for pitching. I don't think I'm going to use Drew Pomeranz. It's just too many guys to use. And then offense, Astros and Rangers, primary targets. And then the teams to mix in just a little of, I think, are Marlins plugs, Mariners plugs. I think really, though, from a stacking standpoint, it's going to be 75 or 80% Astros for me, 20 or 25% Ranger stacks, and that's about it. So if anyone watching has any more questions, otherwise, that'll be it. All right, so have a good weekend, everyone. Thanks for watching. I don't know yet if we'll have any YouTube shows over the weekend, but we will keep everyone posted on RotoPros.com. For those of you in the Slack chat, we'll give you the updates there. For people who aren't members at RotoPros.com, yeah, that's the valuable thing you're missing is all the stuff after this from now until lock that we're giving all the paying subscribers in the Slack chat. So yeah, I guess we'll call it's like a premium chat or whatever. That's where all the useful stuff after this is going to come out when we get these lineup updates, Anthony Rendon, whatever, just more specifics on that sort of thing. But as far as the schedule and stuff, we'll have that up on Twitter. So thanks for watching, everyone. And again, have a good weekend.